Welcome to the CabinetSense Bootcamp series. Today we'll be talking about CabinetSense materials, material palettes, and thicknesses, and how you can use them in your model. We'll start off by bringing out a cabinet. Every CabinetSense component has a material group. We'll open it up, and it has a series of attributes. And if I go inside the cabinet and look at a part, it also has a material group. On the top level, there is a material palette attribute. And it's showing up as blank, but if you click on the drop-down list, it's actually showing 3 question marks and the word default. The 3 question marks tell you that it is looking for a palette called default, but it can't find it. So it's basically undefined. There is a material palette in the sample library, so we're going to go down and pull it out. We'll look at the palette name, and it's called default. Going back to the cabinet, the material palette now shows the value default, meaning it has found it. We can simply re-render the cabinet to bring out the materials and colors and grains that are defined on that palette. So the question is, how does CabinetSense know which materials to use? On the cabinet level, the material is specified as Carcass 1, and after it, it says melamine white plus particle board plus melamine white. The drawer material is birch and particle board and birch, meaning the A side is birch, the B side is birch, and the substrate is particle board. So the cabinet uses Carcass 1. If I go inside, select the door, its material is millwork 1. And if I go down to the drawer box, and double clicking gets me inside again, I'll double click once more, and now I'm at the drawer box level. It's using a material called drawer 1. Going back to the palette, here's our millwork 1, our carcass 1, and our drawer 1, and the different materials that it's using. So let's say that our drawer box is typically made out of the same material as our cabinet. So in this case, it would be melamine white. A lot of first-time users will do this. They'll go down to the drawer box and change the material to be the same as the carcass. And that works. But if I brought out another cabinet, it still is using birch for the drawer box. And why? Because it's still using drawer 1 as the material. Let's go back to the palette. What we really want to do is decide, are our drawer boxes always made out of the same material as our carcass? If it is, then we should change it in the palette. If this one change where the drawer box is melamine white is an exception, then the way we've done it is correct. So let's assume that we always build out of the same material. I'm just going to get rid of this. I'm going to go back to our palette, and I'm going to change the definition of what I use for the drawer material to be melamine white. Now when I bring out another box, it continues to use the same material. Let's go back and make another change. Well, let's say the client now asks for maple rather than melamine white for our carcass. Our drawer boxes stayed as melamine white. So Based on how we have our palette, we really needed to go in and change our drawer boxes to maple as well. But there's a better way. If our construction method is always to use the same material for our drawer box, we can use references. So what I will do is I will say, use the same material as carcass 1. Now if I change carcass 1, and I'll just change the A side back to melamine white, everything changes. Let's get rid of the door layer. So we've got two-sided material, melamine white on one side and maple on the other. Let's put it back to maple. So let's explore what we can do with palettes. Let's say the kitchen that we're designing, we want a certain set of material for our cabinets along the wall, but our island is going to be a different material altogether. We'll go ahead and make a copy of the cabinet, and I've just used Control Move, and I'm going to make a copy of the palette as well. I'm going to change the name of this palette that I've just duplicated. I'm going to call it Island. And I'm going to say that the island, the only difference is it's going to use an MDF door. Let's put the door layers back on. And I'm going to change this first cabinet. It's still using default, but now I have a secondary material palette, and I can select it. Not the color we want for MDF. Let's go in to our material palette again for our island. And I'm going to go down to the finishing group, and I'm going to say that our MDF is going to be colored white. So this has done a couple things for us. We know the material is MDF. We know we're going to spray it white. And on our bill of materials, we will actually get an area, square yards or square meters, of the surface area to paint. So we can use that to help us estimate. Let's go back. Let's explore the palette a little bit more with the options that are available. We have a whole set of materials, and basically everything with a number 1, millwork 1, carcass 1, drawer, construction, glass, those all have definitions in the sample library. The construction 2, or the second set, are typically empty, and you can see there's no colors in there. And you can use them if you want, but essentially you can get by most of the time just by using the primary set of materials. Every material has a good side, or the A side, and a B side. So if you're using, it could be a laminate job where you're using backer board on the B side and a good laminate for the face. It could be plywood, like an oak A1, where you have a better face and a lesser quality face on the opposite side. CabinetSense allows you to do just that. Specify which is the good side, which is the bad side. And in fact, let's assume that our carcass is a maple plywood, and there is a side that is of better quality. So what we want to do is show a B side of inferior quality. And that's where the good one side comes in. We can click good one side. Let me just zoom out. Get rid of the doors and drawers. And when I click on good one side, watch what happens to the maple material. The B side now has a different material. It's called maple at B. And the material actually has dots so that you can visually confirm which side is A and which side is B. And so now in the cabinet, if you said, well, this cabinet, I want the good side inside, you can now simply choose the face. And then everything flips. You can go down to a part. Let's choose the right side. And I can say, you know what? I want the good side out on this one. So why is this so important? When you're cutting your jobs on a CNC, which side faces up on your router table is really important. Otherwise, we could be drilling into the wrong side of the part, and when you assemble a cabinet, it won't be exactly the way that you had envisioned it. Let's go back and look at a few more things on the palette. In addition to all of the materials, we can have color for our handles. We can describe our edge banding. And again here, I have used referencing. So I've said, for our exposed edge banding, I want it to be the same material as our doors and drawer fronts. I could assign it an edge banding thickness, and CabinetSense would reduce the part size for whatever edge has that type of banding. We also have finishing materials that we went through, and we also have laminates. So this is where I could do something like, I want to use beige linen, and I want to use a white backer, and I'll go up to my carcass, and I will say my A side is laminate 1, and my B side is laminate 2. When I export the job, I will get the area that I need for the backer board and the area, square meters, square yards that I need for the linen. In addition to using the colors and materials from the CabinetSense library, you can also go and download images off the web, or grab any PNG or JPEG file and use the material picker icon. Here I've gone to the web, downloaded a Wilson Art casual linen image, and I'm simply going to choose it. It'll come back, and if there is grain detected in it, CabinetSense will ask you which way the grain is running. In this case, it looks like it doesn't really matter, so we'll just say there is no prominent grain. Click Apply, and we're now using that image that we've downloaded. Let's take a closer look at edge banding. You'll see in the model that the edges are showing the actual substrate of the material. We have edge banding showing on the front. So let's take a look at some of the options we have when using this. First of all, not all clients want to assign edge banding to parts. You could be a designer and you just like to see all parts edge banded. And you can accomplish that by going to the CabinetSense preferences, to the material group, and changing from the default edge from substrate to exterior. If you still have edge banding defined, then that edge banding will take precedence. Let's go back to our substrate. Every part has a banding group where you can assign what kind of edge banding goes on which edge. So the front of this part has exposed, and you get to choose between exposed, semi-exposed, concealed, and scribe. And the value for those are kept on the material palette. So here's our exposed, semi-exposed, concealed, and scribe. So our exposed, we've assigned a reference to say use whatever the doors and drawers are. Semi-exposed, the same thing. But let's change it. We'll say use whatever the carcass is using. And concealed, let's just simply choose a color. So blue will be our concealed color, and a scribe will assign black. Now the labels of exposed to scribe, etc., can be used however you want. A scribe typically means you want more material on one edge so that you can scribe it against a wall. So you can use it that way by assigning a thickness of a minus value. So for example, -1 inch would give you a scribe or grow that edge for whichever edge has a scribe banding associated. We'll leave it at 0 for now. Let's go down to this part and let's change it from an exposed front to a semi-exposed. And now it's picking up the carcass A-side material, which is our laminate. Let's say that you are a company that edge bands the bottom of your parts. We'll go to our right side, and on the bottom, we'll choose concealed. And let's say this edge needs to be scribed against the wall. And it's as simple as that. You've now visually you can see which edges are getting what kind of banding associated with it. And when you export, CabinetSense will deduct or grow part sizes based on what you've assigned for thicknesses. Let's move on to thicknesses. In our cabinet, we have two thicknesses in our material group. We have an actual thickness and a nominal thickness. The actual thickness is read-only, you can't change it. And by default, the actual thickness is the exact same thing as the nominal. Where we will get into actual thicknesses, and we'll show this later on, is when you want to measure the thickness of the actual sheets in your shop and put that value in and process it that way. So for now, we're only going to deal with nominal. So nominal is really what you design for. You're designing typically with a 3/4 inch material, etc. In the model that we're working with, the cabinet that we brought out was initially measured in metric. So this is 16 millimeter material, almost 5 or close to 5/8 of an inch. Let's change our preferences. And instead of dealing with millimeters, let's use inches. Let's change, we can change our format of how we want it displayed in the component options. So let's go to 1/32. Let's change our metric format to only 1 decimal place. And we're still going to show both units so that we can compare values. When I click on the cabinet now, the inches will be shown first. And when we enter a value, it'll be assumed that it's inches unless you enter the millimeters or inch symbol. So let's change this cabinet to 3/4 inch material. If we go down to a part, the actual thickness is 3/4 because at this point nominal and actual are the same thing. And the nominal is set to 0. And when it's 0, it means go get the thickness from the parent, which is the cabinet in general, which is 3/4 of an inch. So we can override thickness values on any part, just like we could override the material at any part as well. So we'll go into here, into our stretcher, and we'll enter 1/2 of an inch. If I go back to the cabinet and then decide I want to make it out of 1 inch material, that part that we overrode and put as 1/2 inch is still at 1/2 inch. So once you change a thickness on a subpart, the cabinet will never overwrite that part again. If we brought in another cabinet, It goes back to the 16 millimeter, which is how the library has been defined. So again, we would have to go in and change the thickness to be what we wanted it to be. Now, there's a much better way of doing that. In your sample library, there is a project component. And in there, you can set your thicknesses. So I'm going to set my carcass value to be 3/4 of an inch. So when I hit enter, all of the parts changed. If I brought in another cabinet, it also was changed to 3/4 of an inch. So this is an easy way of setting your defaults, and all cabinets and all parts coming in will conform to that standard. But let's go to this cabinet, because if you remember, we had set this stretcher to be 1/2 inch. Doesn't look 1/2 inch anymore. In fact, it's been moved back to 3/4. So why did this happen? The project component forces the changes to other cabinets or to other parts. So you can set the thicknesses on the carcass, the door, the drawer box. So if you wanted, for example, go back to the carcass, if you wanted a back of 1/2 of an inch, it's now 1/2 of an inch. But let's say this one stretcher that we put in, we do want it to be 1/2 inch. What we want to do is lock it. This is going to prevent the project component from forcing a change onto that specific part. So let's go back to the project. Let's just get rid of these two for now. And make this 1 inch again. Everything has got back to 1 inch, except this. Our back is still 1/2, because that's what our project was telling us to do. So we can set our door to be 3/4 of an inch. Let's say we're doing a 5-piece door, and we want to use 3/8 of an inch for our panel insert. Our drawer boxes will be let's say 5/8, with a bottom of 1/4 inch. If we brought back the doors and drawer fronts, if we go back down, if we take a quick measure, it's 5/8 of an inch. So locking items that you don't want changes being forced upon is pretty important to do. The lock has another feature as well. A lot of clients don't actually want to use a stretcher when they're doing, let me bring out let's say we're doing a 3-drawer cabinet. A lot of clients will not use a stretcher, but CabinetSense needs it to divide it into openings so that you can place the drawers inside of each opening. What you can do is simply go down, place a lock, leave the nominal thickness at 0, and you've now got a 0 thickness part. The drawers are sized fully to be within that opening, and those 0 thickness parts do not get exported. Let's turn our attention to getting our model ready to export. One of the first things we want to do is take a look at what materials we've got assigned in our model. And we can do that by looking at the Job Materials screen. It lists all the different combinations of material along with the thicknesses. You can sort any of the columns by simply clicking on it. to get it into a sequence that's best for you. We also have 4 other columns that we'll come back to and talk about in a minute. This is listing all of the different material and thicknesses used in this job. I'm just going to make a copy of this cabinet. I'm going to change this to be 16 millimeters. And now let's call up our job material screen. And you'll notice we've now got 3 variations of thicknesses for our sheet goods. So this will allow us to do a quick review on the materials that we want to use and spot anything that doesn't look quite right. So in this case, let's say that we've got a room of cabinets and we don't know where this 16 millimeter material is being used. We know that's not right. We can go to the job review material screen, and now it lists by material, by thicknesses. It also lists by part. And again, we can sort by any column. Here's our 16 millimeter material. All we have to do is click on the magnifying glass to go find where that's being referenced. Let me scroll out. I'm going to do that again. And so whichever one you click on will get highlighted. We can come back down into here. We can say, oh, I've got 2 parts using a 1/2 inch back. And there they are. Sometimes it's easier to turn on X-ray vision to see where these parts are. So for example, we have a drawer box bottom, 1/4 inch. And if I click on it, can't really see it because the bottom is really dadoed into the sides and we're not seeing any of the highlighted edges. Turn on X-ray mode, and there they are. Okay, let's go back to our 16 millimeters. In this case, we don't want the 16 millimeters. It should have been 3/4 like the other cabinet. We can simply type in 3/4 of an inch and hit enter. And that cabinet that used to be 16 is now 3/4. And if you had had 3 or 4 cabinets that were at 16 millimeters, all of them would have been changed at once. Let's go back to our job material screen. And we no longer have the 16 millimeter version. Okay, let's talk about the other 4 fields in this table. One of the things you can do with CabinetSense is declare an actual thickness. And what this means is that the thickness of the material, even though we expect to use a certain thickness, when we go out to the shop and let's say we calibrate the actual sheet that we've received, we may find that it's a little bit shy of what the thickness is that we thought we were using. In a lot of cases, this doesn't matter. And for a lot of cabinet builders, they'll simply go ahead and mill as if it was 3/4 of an inch. Other cabinet builders do care about that. A lot of times it has to do with dados. Your dados will fit a lot better, if at all, as long, when you have the actual thickness declared. So let's investigate that a little bit. I'm going to go back. We'll get rid of this guy for now. We don't need him. Let's get him out of X-ray. Okay, let's go in to the right end and we're going to change this material to be millwork. So now we've got basically like a finished end on one side and an unfinished end on the other. Now let's say we do care about our actual thicknesses in this case. So when we get ready to export the job, we're going to go out to our shop. We're going to go ahead and measure the thicknesses of our sheet goods. And let's say we come in and we find out that this particular sheet is not 3/4 of an inch. It's actually just a little bit more. So we'll go in. We'll find that 3/4 inch thickness right here, sheet good and alder with particle board. And we'll go in here and we'll say it's 0.76 of an inch. Now when we click on that end, you can see that the actual thickness now is no longer the same as the nominal. The nominal would have been the parent because we've got it set at 0. So let's go back to our settings and let's change the way that we display our imperial format to be 4 decimal places. We'll click on the panel again and there's our 0.76. So what this allows you to do is if I wanted to go back and say, oh, you know what, we're going back to an unfinished end, we're going to flip back to the white, the actual thickness goes back to 0.75 because we haven't told it that the melamine white is any different than the nominal thickness. And so now you can notice that the 3/4 inch particle board is no longer there. And that's because we're not using it in our job anymore. If I go back and turn it back on, now go take a look and it shows up again and it's retained our thickness setting of 0.76. All right, let's take a look at what else we can do. We can assign, let's take this row here, we have a 1/2 inch melamine white particle board. At least that's the way we've described the composition of it. But perhaps in the shop, we are using a white hardboard rather than an actual white melamine sheet. We can go in, and I'm just going to call it white hardboard. I can make that the default if I want, and what that will do is it will save it, so the next time you use 1/2 inch white melamine particle board, it will actually be referenced to a white hardboard. Not setting it as default just means it's only set for this job. You can also turn on or off whether or not you want to export this particular kind of material. So I'm going to leave this as is, but you know, we could turn off. If I didn't want to export my drawers and I know that these are my drawers, I could go in and simply turn off the export. We'll leave them on for now. So the one thing I didn't show you, oops, we're going to go over to here. This is the way I've set up my material. I've got my alder particle board alder for my millwork, melamine white for my carcass, and birch two-sided, meaning I've got a good side and or a side and a B side that are different materials. If you look at the drawer, let me just pull it out. We have the B side on the outside. So when we go ahead and machine our drawer box, the dados, the sheet has to be facing up on the router so that our dados can be cut into the sides and back in front of the drawer box. Let's go ahead and export. If I bring up what was created, here's our export folder, here's our job, and notice that the birch, which has the two-sided material, is telling us to place the good side up, or GSU, for the bottom, and also good side up for the sides. And therefore our dados will be grooved on the correct side. Our two materials that we gave shop material names to are now called exactly what we named them in our job material screen. So let's go back and rename our birch plywood as well. And export again. from the most recent. So this is the latest one we just did. And now our birch is called Baltic birch. It still has the good side up. So we haven't lost any designation, and we're using your shop material names. So let's summarize a little bit. We've gone into our materials. We've set our materials to what we want. We've gone into our project component, and we set our thicknesses to what we want. And more often than not, these are your standards that you're going to use in your shop all the time. Or perhaps you have 2 or 3 standards. So what you can do is you can create SketchUp templates that start you off exactly where you want it to begin with. So let's make a template. We're just going to start over. But this time, we're going to start with a template that CabinetSense initially installed for you. Given that we're using an imperial measure in this model, we're going to choose the CabinetSense Imperial. We have also a Closets Imperial, and this is for the 32 millimeter System 32 build. So we're doing custom cabinets. We'll go ahead with this version. We could actually click on it to make it your favorite, which means when you do a file new, you're going to get this to start with. So we'll go ahead. And now inside this template is your project component and your palette. So let's emulate what we did in our previous example. We have 0.75. We have our back at 0.5. Our doors were 3/4 and 3/8 with 5/8 inch drawers, except with a 1/4 inch bottom. We could set this as well. We'll say where it is good one side, so it will generate our 2. So this looks exactly the way that we had it set up in our previous version. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to click back on perspective, or basically any scene that you want to start off with. So if you'd like to start off in the plan view, click on the plan tab and then click Save as Template. And we're going to call this Test. And it's got checked off set as default template. And I'm going to leave it as the default. So now when I click Save, if I go File New from Template, you'll notice I have a test template and it's the favorite. So I'll choose it. And that would be the same now if I just do File New, because it's your favorite. If I go over to the Project tab, it has our settings that we did in the before we saved it as a template. And you'll notice, I'll just start over, it starts us off in the plan view. So you might want to start off by drawing walls. We can bring in a cabinet, and I'm using Component Finder. And simply bring in a cabinet. That cabinet has now been changed to 3/4 inch. If we go down to our drawer box, it is 5/8 with a 1/4 inch bottom. And of course, there's nothing saying that you can't go back in. And if you had different standards, you could say, well, I build out of 3/4 inch. I also build out of 1/2 inch, or, etc. 5/8. So you could have a 5/8 inch template as well. So maybe this is the only change. So we'll click Apply, and now I'll save it as a template. 0.625. Now I have a choice. When I start off, I can choose this one or this one, depending on what kind of model I'm going to build. And that wraps up this bootcamp series on materials.